Okay. Yeah. So
Thank you, everybody. TJ, everybody, for showing up. Let's get it started. I'm chairman of the, as you know, the General Government Committee. Councilor Letterman and myself had done some work. Well, it was two items that we wanted to discuss today. I don't think there's any particular order that is important. But one is the, I think Councilor Letterman and Ed has talked privately. I'd like to have, so you want to start with the long-term leases, Jesse, and then we'll move into.
Whatever the, let's actually do the impacted neighborhood first, because I think that'll be a probably shorter conversation.
Okay, is anybody who's in a hurry to leave? That probably also be the good way to get it done. If anybody's in a real hurry. TJ's trying to mock something.
Yeah, I said I'm always in a hurry to leave, but I guess that's not for this hour.
Okay.
No,
right.
Jesse's right. The stabilization one is just a quick update.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, may I?
Yeah, please, Jesse.
Great. Yeah. So as folks know, Councilor Edwards, myself, a few other councilors had worked last year with TJ and the law department to put together a specific reserve fund to be drawn from part of the 33% of the local options tax on sales of recreational cannabis products in the city. And so just given that Liberty opened recently, we expect INSA and Six Bricks at some point to open in the near future at some point. Just thought we could get an update on what revenue collection from Liberty is maybe looking like so far. And then we had discussed putting in place a sort of set of policies and procedures around how to bring funding forward out of that account, since it requires obviously appropriation by the mayor, as all funds do, and then 2/3, I think, approval by the city council to move it. So maybe we could just begin thinking about what those look like, not to develop them right now, but just to hear from finance what you guys are thinking on both those items.
Yeah, so we actually haven't done any projections yet, since Liberty is so new, as to what we think they might be bringing in as revenue. Way back before this all happened, Tim Brown took the lead on doing some kind of back of the envelope estimates and analysis. We didn't know what it would mean when the economy becomes a little more saturated. If Springfield has, 1, soon to be 2 and 3 opening, and ultimately 4 when if 311 Page gets going. So I don't really have any revenue updates, except for revenue will start flowing now that we at least have one recreational marijuana dispensary open. As far as process wise, what we're going to need now that we're, not coming out of COVID, but we're doing more meetings, is to hear from some of the neighborhood councils and some of the other folks on how, A, their needs, and B, how we're going to get this spent. The key part is I believe we want to keep all the money within city departments, because we're learning that's the easiest way to monitor and manage all the different things. So if it's a parks project, we get it to Pat Sullivan. If it's a DPW sidewalk, we get it to Chris Signoli. But it's really just a matter of what the projects are that come in as requested by the impacted neighborhoods, and what they're actually looking for. Then we're going to develop a similar process to the capital plan of saying, okay, we've gotten all these needs, we've got this amount of money that we're going to spend. And then when the mayor appropriates it to the city council or recommends to the city council for appropriation, you're right, Councilor, 2/3 vote will make the project happen.
I think that's great. If I recall correctly, this coming out of the local options tax, do we get this paid out quarterly by the state?
I believe so. We could double check now that it's here. I mean, I kind of did put this on the back burner as they were kind of doing all their renovations during the COVID stuff. But now that it's here, we can certainly start the process. And I'll give Tim that project again, since he did a lot of research on it way back when this was all starting and happening.
Sure. So I think, everything you said, TJ, it sounds good to me. I think one of the things you hit upon in terms of sort of reaching out to the community to hear from them in the impacted neighborhoods that are eligible for the funding, what they need is probably one of the most key pieces, and having both the administration and counselors involved in that, so that, the hope is by the time it comes for the 2/3 vote, it's sort of something that everybody already is behind. So we're not getting into like we want to see it flow smoothly, obviously.
So my vision would be kind of like a special spin-off of the capital improvement committee, because it's not all just going to be capital. but it's going to be a similar kind of group where it's going to be representatives from the council, the administration, probably the Parks Department, probably the DPW, probably economic development, and having representatives that are going to hear from neighborhood councils, put together a kind of a list of plans of the nice to haves, and then come up with an overall, whether it's annual or whether it's semi-annual, quarterly, or whatever it may be, or just as needed. Maybe it's one of those, hey, something comes up that we really see an issue that needs to be addressed, and we want to put the money from that into like whatever it may be. So.
And I think that's a good vision. I also think I think also something Councilor Allen did a couple of weeks ago as our representative on the Capital Improvement Committee was he sent something out to councilors and said, hey, we're going to be having a meeting.
Yep.
Send me all your ideas. I think he was well-intentioned. The meeting was the next day, so I don't know that everybody was able to get him those, but I think doing maybe another committee meeting once we have an idea of what the funding sources look like or what the projections are. Mm-hmm. Also just with the council, maybe a committee of the whole, and just be able to have a number of ideas put together from the council as well. Just because
it's actually a good place to
with their neighborhoods a lot.
Yeah, solicit input from the city council as a whole. When we're ready, start generating ideas there, and then spin off and open it up to other agencies or neighborhood groups rather.
Yeah, and then put that all together. I think that would be great. Once you collect all of that, I think a committee with representation from the council, from the administration, and then and obviously yourselves. I think that would work well. And that's why I wanted to call the meeting now. Obviously, I think we probably haven't even received a payout because we haven't even gone a quarter. So I think, I think well in advance of the next fiscal year, being able to, start putting this together is going to make it run smoothly.
Sounds good to me.
That's what I have.
And there's no objections. We have a small group. I'm not a big formality kind of guy, so if everybody can just be a little, patient with each other, we can just no need to raise hands and speak. I think we can manage it together. It's a small enough group. But that being said, TJ, how complicated is it going to be if I'm understanding it correctly? There is a area in which around where the money from each dispensary is supposed to be allocated. How complicated is that going to be when in order to, is that in fact true or factual? And if it is, how complicated is that going to be trying to manage multiple sites? And in many cases, or in some cases where they may even overlap in terms of distance?
So I think, as long as the council and the administration agree as what the boundaries are, I think that's the first step, is to understanding which ones are the boundaries, and I have to go back and brush up on whatever the 2.5 miles of the radius or whatever. I forget exactly what all the details were, but I think the key part is for us to map out on a GIS kind of what we think this looks like from their locations. And I'm going to put Tim on that as well. I've seen him put together maps. I presume he can do the radius predictions of where that's going to kind of put us. And once we all agree that that's the radius, if it falls outside that radius and it's not a disparate section that impacted, then we just say we'll use a different funding source if it merits funding, and if not, we can use this funding source. So I think that is the way I would recommend it once I see the map. Based upon the distances and where the locations are as of today, I think it covers a good chunk of the city, but I can't say that for sure until we map it out.
Mr.
Tim,
Chair,
can you look into that?
The way the legislation was written, Mr. Chair, is I believe 1.5 miles from the location itself is eligible. And the idea behind that was to make sure that the communities that are hosts to these are going to see some economic benefit, and then. The second piece to it was also eligible are historically impacted neighborhoods as defined, by the Cannabis Control Commission, neighborhoods that have been historically impacted by the illegal sale of drugs. And I think TJ's right. I mean, a lot of the city is encompassed once you look at that, and as more open, more will be encompassed as well. I think the key is with this committee that we're talking about. Is to be cognizant of that and make sure that as projects are coming forward, that they're thinking of where they were last funded. The nice thing about this is, this is a revenue source that will just continue. So it's not a one-time grant round. If something doesn't get funded the first time, it can go to the next one. So
yeah.
And does anybody have any objections over not being? I don't think there's any great urgency. Obviously, if we start trying to spend money in the first quarter, there's not going to be you're not going to be able to access. Maybe we kind of slowly do this, roll it out, allow some money to accumulate in the fund so that, some sizable projects. I mean, I don't expect it every year to do $100,000, $200,000 projects. But I mean, if there's only $5,000 in the thing, in the pot, and we already start to nickel and dime in it, maybe we just use some, I don't know, maybe there's not, just have consensus that we should be patient with letting some money accumulate and before we start trying to expend it. But
Mr. Chairman, I would agree with you on that sense. The only thing I just want to make sure, and I'm sorry, Counselor, if you want to comment first, go ahead, Jesse.
Oh, no, go ahead, TJ. Yeah.
I'm just saying, right now, what I really want to do, since Liberty's open, is compare their bid submission and their revenue assumptions in their bid submissions against what they'll be doing in the first quarter to see if they're even in the ballpark.
Okay.
Because when I was looking at numbers for all the submissions that came through, they were all over the place. Some seemed really tight based upon products. Others seemed more, we think the industry's heading this way. And so it's really just to see. I agree with you. The more you got to manage expectations, that if you sit there and go out and say we're going to fund some projects and you only have $20,000 to fund and you get $1 million worth of requests, then we're going to have a lot of upset individuals. But if we have $1 million and we go out for $1 million, then we can kind of be a little more decisive and strategic.
Well, I expect some of the projections that were created in the process for the bids, for the whole streaming and the special permit, they're going to have to be tempered. I mean,
Yeah,
I've driven past Liberty at least 7 or 8 times now, and I've never seen more than 2 people, either going in or coming out at any one time. The expectation when we started this process that we would have the long lines and you would need a lot of people, police presence, traffic was going to be impacted. We're not seeing that, and I don't expect that we are. Just 2 days ago, I believe Chicopee announced that they're considering their 3rd application. I know there's applications in Holyoke. It's not that big of a deal anymore.
Yeah.
And they're going to be just like the liquor stores, except we hope that the loitering, trash, and other impacts like that are not as impactful, because they're managed. These are by law going to be managed much more strictly than liquor stores are. So anybody else, Tracy, Lindsay, Ed, somebody, Theo, any of you guys want to jump in with a comment or a question?
Sorry.
Go ahead, Lindsay.
I was just saying, no, I didn't have anything to add.
Okay. Ed?
I haven't seen any marketing from Liberty yet. And I don't know if their opening was sort of soft on purpose. I didn't see any sort of big splash or anything like that. So I'm not surprised there aren't any lines. I have gone by other places where there are lines, not in Springfield, obviously, but I would think that once sort of the word is out, we will see a little more action there.
Well, from a revenue point of view, I'd be happy to see more traffic. Tracy, did you want to offer any comments?
No, just here to listen.
Okay, thank you for your attendance. Appreciate you being here. And Theo, yeah, you're a Jets fan. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Chairman, if I could have one more thought. I think actually the fact that the market is stabilizing, I guess, so to speak, with more cannabis dispensaries opening, I think it'll actually allow us to get a better prediction on revenue too, instead of seeing one major surge in the beginning like Northampton did, for example. I mean, certainly disappointing to miss out on a surge of revenue, but it will allow us, I think, to predict in the future a little more steadily what the revenue may be. So I think this was a good conversation, and maybe our next meeting should be in the next quarter of the committee, assuming what happens next year. But our next conversation on this should be in the new quarter to see if we can do a revenue prediction and a revenue estimate based on their first quarter sales, and be able to get an idea of what might be in the fund at the end of the year, and then start having some more conversations about potential committee and then how to do outreach to the community. So, I think in the interim, obviously, TJ can bring it back to the administration, the mayor's office, and then we can just get ready to see that, hopefully get that revenue prediction is the wrong word I'm using, but the revenue ideas in the next quarter.
Well, unfortunately, we don't know yet exactly what the leadership of the council will be at the present time. I'm chairman of this general government committee. We don't know who we're going to have, what committee assignments yet for going into next year.
Yeah, for sure.
But we'll manage it. I will
certainly push it with whoever is the chair of the general government committee.
Exactly. Regardless of committee assignment, we'll be involved with it. And Tim, you're going to create the maps. You're comfortable with that request, I take it?
Yep. Yeah. And just to let you know, so the next payment that we'll have this on, that will be March 31st is when that will come in. That's when they do the quarterly payments, because they lag everything by a month so that we can get 12 months in for each fiscal year. So it's kind of like the quarters of the year, but we're just behind a month.
So probably a suggestion for whoever is chairing this committee and going into 2021 probably would be for us to come back with this subject in probably about mid-April. Does that sound good to you, Tim?
Yep. Yeah, and we can have the maps all made up by then, for where projects can be located.
Okay. If there's no objections, I appreciate the comments and questions. The next item, Jesse, you're the lead on this one as well. So please feel free to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I wanted to have a conversation sort of in following the conversations that have happened around the lease of the shooting range on Page Boulevard, not specifically about the shooting range on Page Boulevard, but just about how we generally purchase and lease real estate in the city, and so in compliance with our own ordinances and with state law. So I know the solicitor and I have talked about this a little bit. I appreciate Theo being on the call. I apologize, my basset hound is having a sneezing fit over here. You didn't hear? Okay, it was very loud. So we've spoken of the work from home challenges. So we had spoken about this. So I appreciate Theo being here, and I think sort of the first question that I had sent over to the solicitor was relative to the role of the city council, if any, in essentially purchasing real estate, and wanted to see if we could cover that first.
So I'm going to let Theo talk more about the practices. I mean, by law, there are circumstances where the city council plays a very important role under the legal standards, where, for example, where we have to go out to bid, and there are various requirements, but there are exceptions, and the unique property exception is one, and I think we've experienced that. But Theo, if he could just sort of summarize how they handle it, I think that would be the best way to get a more practical explanation.
Okay, so 30B, Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30B dictates how we buy, the city, municipalities buy supplies and services. And then the statute defines what those are, what's a supply and what's a service. Within 30B, there is actually a subsection, and it's section 16. And that is the subsection of 30B that deals specifically with the acquisition and disposition of real estate. These are the purchases, the sales, and the leases. Okay, now I know that the council, when we go for a lease for the computer equipment, comes to mind. That's a 5-year term typically that Paul Foster and the school department does. So 30B dictates that any contract for a supply or service comes before the city council to get approved if it's over 3 years in length. Subsection 16 basically doesn't have that requirement. That's both for unique property acquisitions which is a subsection of the subsection, and then in general for leases. And in the opinion that Ed sent out, there's actually a manual, a 30B manual that the state issues, and there's user notes that are in it from the Inspector General and his team. And one of those user notes is that specifically says 30B, specifically through Section 16, does not limit the length of real property contracts, which could be a lease. The Chapter 30B majority vote requirement for supply and services contracts exceeding 3 years does not apply to Chapter 30B real property contracts. And that was taken to court, I think in Natick, and they upheld it, and that's where they came up with these user notes. So that's probably a jumping off point to answering your question, and we can go from there.
Well, can I add something to that?
Please.
So yeah, I mean, that's the general sort of description of what happens. In terms of a role. So sometimes we go to city council, sometimes we don't. Whether we do or not need to as a legal matter, and then what information we provide as a policy matter, I think is another issue. And I think that gets to more of what you're looking for. And so as far as that's concerned, and let me just give for instance, I know that every month we have Pat Burns come and give us a revenues and expenditure summary to the council. It's an informational report. It's not something where you vote to approve what revenues have happened or approve what expenditures have happened, but you're just accepting a report. And, as a matter of practice and as a matter of, and as a policy decision, I don't think we want to have any more like red tape in approving stuff. But it's probably good practice from a policy standpoint to have reports to you of what's going on, whether we need your approval or not. And TJ and I have talked about this, Theo and I have talked about this, and I think that's the direction we should probably follow. Not to put, more roadblocks in the way, but just to provide greater transparency and public information to the council, and so they get the bigger picture of what's going on, and the public.
So I think that's a good conversation to have. Relative to the role of buying and selling real estate, though, and my next question was on leasing. You've sort of answered the leasing question, and in my sort of research arrived at similar conclusion, although I do have a question about that. But on buying and selling real estate, if we are actually buying or selling a piece of real estate, what is the council's role there?
Well, Theo can talk. Go ahead, Theo.
Well, the acquisition of real estate is done through an RFP process, which is in the way that RFP process is similar to the regular 30B RFP process, but it's a little bit different depending on what kind of property we're talking about. Again, the shooting range comes to mind. That was an extremely unique piece of property. So for us to put out an RFP would have been, I don't want to say a waste, but it would have been a misallocation of resources. There would have been no one else to have a property in their inventory that would have been able to supply it. Which is why when there's a unique property acquisition or disposition, we post a notice in the central register. So that goes out for 30 days prior to the negotiation of any lease, which it did in that case. And, the reason why the legislature instructs us to do that is probably because if you were sitting at home with such a property, that would be your opportunity to chime in and say, it's not that unique. We have this similar thing. Contrast that with something where the police substation that we did at Dwight, we're looking for office space. It really wasn't unique in any particular set of circumstances. We had certain qualifiers that would make one property more advantageous than the next, but there was nothing to say, we need this particular parcel at this particular location that has this particular unique attribute. So we went out for an RFP for something like that.
But we leased both of those properties. We didn't purchase them.
Correct. Those are both leases.
So if we were to purchase them, would there be a role for the council? A required role, I should say.
Well, the purchase works the same way as the lease. It's the same process. It's just a acquisition of a piece of land, whether it's a lease or a purchase. So the process doesn't differ.
So solicitor, do you agree that when purchasing a piece of property, it's the same as an acquisition, a same type of acquisition as a lease, and the council has no role?
I don't like the words "has no role" because I do think that has a role, but your role is more policy. You know, I mean, like, for example, I mean, you made a cut from the budget. You know, that's a proper role. So I wouldn't say no role. In terms of approvals requirements, you know, you're correct. There's no approval requirement. Do you have a role? Absolutely.
So what about Chapter 40 of MGL in Section 14 that says that property can't be purchased or sold without the approval of the city council?
Theo,
sorry,
you went away. I think we covered that, but go ahead, Theo.
Can you repeat that citation, Counselor? Is that Chapter 40, Section 14?
Yeah.
All right, so that is specific to eminent domain takings. It says it actually in the text. City or selectmen of a board, Boston, other than Boston, may not or take by eminent domain under Chapter 79 any land. So that chapter is specific to eminent domain.
I mean, if you look at it in Mass General, it says Section 14, purchase of land, conditions, limitations, definition. The alderman of any city except Boston or the selectmen of a town may purchase or take by eminent domain under Chapter 79 any land, easement, or right therein within the city or town not already appropriated for public use for any municipal purpose, blah, 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 so on and so forth. And then it says, but no land, easement, or right therein shall be taken or purchased under this section unless the taking or purchase thereof has been previously authorized by the city council or by vote of the town, nor until any appropriation of money to be raised by loan or otherwise has been made for the purpose by 2/3 such and so. So, I mean, it mentions eminent domain, but it doesn't seem like it is only specific to eminent domain. It seems like it is specific to the purchase of land. I'm not talking about this in reference to the shooting range. I'm saying if we were to buy a building, would the city council need to approve the purchase of a building?
It's on me.
Whoever is most qualified to answer the question.
I think that, I think so. I think the issue though is, are there any other exceptions that apply? So for example, generally speaking, there's other parts you have to look at. So for example, when we're purchasing real estate, it's not always, we don't always use the city. It might be the parking authority, or it might be the redevelopment authority. So, there's situations where we don't want to have that. We don't want to, if we're going to be financing a huge garage, why do we want to add to the city's debt service? That's why we created parking authority.
Sure, I don't disagree with that.
So let me give you another exception. Sometimes there are friendly takings where we ends up being a purchase, and there's limitations as to as average assessed value over the past 3 years, and so we've got to follow that. But then other times there might be something where we do a purchase, but we think there's a title issue, and so we want to say, you know what? Even though we're purchasing this, we're going to do a taking, and it's a friendly taking. And now we're going in front of the council because we think there's a title problem.
Solicitor, nobody disputes that the council votes on eminent domain, right? But the question is, and nobody disputes those exceptions. The question is, though, if the city of Springfield, as the city, wants to purchase a property we want to purchase a property because we want to put an office space in it. I interpret Chapter 40, Section 14, and I've spoken with others that interpret Chapter 40, Section 14 to say that the city council needs to vote in order to authorize the purchase of real property.
So again, I'm not here to give you legal opinions. I'll be happy to put something in writing if you actually put that down and you want a written opinion, I'll do that. But the answer to your question is sometimes.
Okay.
I mean, that's all I'm going to say in this setting, you know?
The answer in this committee meeting in the last 8 minutes has changed, because when I first brought up section 14, I was told that it only applied to eminent domain and that it had no conditional impact on whether we would vote to take real property. So,
all right, I don't have my opinion in front. Is this part of the question you asked me previously? I don't think so.
It's not. I'm just asking.
So, you know, I mean, we can tell you what the practice is. I can tell you what the policy is. You know, if you want a legal opinion about, you know, I don't think that's right to say role of the city council. If you want to say, is city council approval required? I'll give you an opinion on that.
All right. Well, I mean,
and if you're saying it's verbally, that's good enough for me, and I'll send it to you. But I ain't giving you opinions like this off the top.
It's not uncommon for a solicitor to like ask a legal question in a committee meeting.
Excuse me?
It's not uncommon for the council to ask the law department a legal question in a committee meeting.
Is it a legal question or an opinion you want? And is there something pending that you want? Because it makes no sense. If you want to talk about policy, let's talk about it. If you want me to give a legal opinion off the cuff like this, that's bad policy.
Well, so solicitor, if you feel that the chapter that I'm referencing in the Mass General Law is more nuanced than just the way I asked my question, then I am glad to request a legal opinion from you on it. And then we can go over that legal opinion in executive session. I think,
keep in mind to ask it whether you need approval or not. Don't ask me what the role is, because I'm going to expound on your role, not on the approval process. And I will give you examples of how that section applies in very specific examples. And it'll be a legal opinion. It won't just be some off the cuff, hey, let's shoot
the practice and policy should theoretically be informed by state law. So I guess those two things are sort of connected.
What?
But what
Say that again? I'm not following.
I said our practice and policies in the city should be informed by and in compliance with state law.
But the legal question is always based on hypotheticals or something very particular. So if you want to talk about, you know, purchasing the Smith & Wesson facility, we can talk about that. But if you want to talk about how it works to the average person, feels not only the deputy department head, he's a lawyer. And, you know, he can give you those. If you want a legal opinion that's binding on something, I'm not going to do that in an open session.
Sure. Okay. Well, it seems like you've answered the question to the extent that you will. So my next question is, and if I need to, you know, if we need to request this in the form of a legal opinion, I'll do that too, I guess. But again, I'm just trying to have a committee meeting where we can understand the generality of what's going on here and what informs that. So with that said, section 14 of MGL chapter 40 mentions purchasing, but it also mentions easements and taking of rights therein. If you can, what is that? What are those two things to be interpreted as by comparison to purchasing?
You think that's some sort of an easy question? It's not. The whole notion of property is it's a bundle of rights, and the options that you're talking about there, whether it's an easement or restriction or the full bundle of rights, that varies on the circumstances. So again, the process that we follow, you won't find anything in the general laws, you know, this easement section that is clear as to what the process is going to be. But I can tell you, as a matter of practice, after consultation with the IG, we publish in the Central Register, even if we are doing an easement. You know, so the practice and you know, the law is not always as clear as you might think.
So is there anything that prevents the city council or the city of Springfield from enacting an ordinance or an amendment to the charter or some other sort of locally binding piece of legislation that would further clarify the steps that need to be taken, whether that's related to the purchasing of real property or the leasing of real property?
So you have just asked about 10 questions there. That is not a single question. If you're asking me did you want to pass an ordinance to put more roadblocks in the way of purchasing property? Yeah, you can do that. You have a legal right to make as many roadblocks as you want. As a practical matter, that's going to make it more expensive to the taxpayers, or make things more difficult to even try to do an analysis of the best way of doing it. Remember, if we're purchasing property, we want to, those things are privileged. They're not open meeting issues. Those are things where we get appraisals, whether it's an easement or a property. And we look at those appraisals, and that is not a public record. There are exceptions to that, so that our negotiating strategy is not public. That's not something we want to do in public. We don't want to come in front of the city council and say, hey, we're thinking of buying this. What do you guys think? No, that's something that is an administrative function that we need to go into the market just like everybody else. So I don't know how else to explain it, but if it's your purely, well, we want to exercise power, well, you can do whatever you want, but.
So your answer is the city council could explore local ordinances in that vein. You would just prefer that we not.
Some of them, you're basically going to ruin the city. We want to be consistent with the rest of the state. This is why I'm saying.
I have no idea what I'm going to do or not do. I'm just asking you a series of questions to inform future policy considerations.
And I'm giving you my policy opinions.
Solicitor, you just told me that the idea of exploring further considerations on real property purchases or leasing would ruin the city. That is.
I think it would. I mean, why do you want to put more barriers to make things more expensive for us?
Right.
That
well,
makes no
I think
sense.
that our constituents appreciate fiscal oversight and checks and balances in government. But again, I haven't brought forward a policy proposal to even be analyzed. That we're just having a committee meeting so that we can better understand the roles and the legal options of the city council in real property purchases.
When you have a proposal, give it to me. I'll give you an opinion.
Great. Well, all of my questions have been answered. So that is pretty much all I had on this item, Mr. Chairman, and I'll turn it back over to you.
I have no comment, no question, just appreciation for the dialogue duty between the two of you, and for Theo and Tim and Lindsay's participation. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to comment on or to interject with? If not,
Councilor, I know, Councilor Edwards, you call me anytime and we'll talk. Councilor Letterman, if you just want to send me emails, that's fine. I'll send you emails back. But please feel free to call me, and I will be happy to talk to you about any of these things.
I call you all the time. We've talked on the phone many times. I just
you didn't respond to my email on this. You sent me some questions you wanted answers, and I wrote back to you, and I wanted you to call me, and I'd appreciate it.
I'm happy to call you, Solicitor, but the committee process allows for us to bring more people into the room so that we have Theo in the room, we have the chair in the room, we could have had other counselors in the room. I mean, I think that anybody who looks at the work that I've done on the city council, I have always followed through our proper channels. I have always cleared it with the law department. I have always worked with the law department. We've written some excellent pieces of legislation together. I'm always very appreciative of your deputy solicitors, but I can't help but feel like you feel like this committee meeting was some sort of a way to, like sandbag you. I just asked you some.
That's how it seems. Why wouldn't you call me to talk about this? Why didn't you call me back when I sent you an email?
You didn't tell me to call you back.
Sure I did. It's right in the email.
But Solicitor, the committee process is a place for us to have policy discussions so that we don't just come up with legislation out of nowhere. I mean, this is the process of the city council. These are the rules that we put in place to conduct conversations.
That's not what you're doing. You're asking me legal opinions on general questions without any specifics.
You know that we can't have for example, a phone call with me, you, and Councilor Edwards about this. It's a violation of.
I didn't say that. I said you.
Sure. So, I certainly will be having conversations with you.
Excuse me, gentlemen.
Gather some basic legal information from the city solicitor's office, and it is not unreasonable of me to do that.
Gentlemen, I don't think that this is.
I won't comment on your reasonability anymore.
Thank you.
When we start out talking about the operation of the people's minds and their perceived perception of comments and questions, I think we're getting out of the scope of, or the value of having this meeting. So if there are no objections, I'd like to ask for this meeting to end.
No objection on me.
Certainly. Move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn, and I second that motion. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time, and I look forward to speaking with you all again in the future. Thank you.